Hi guys, well today we're going to be taking a look at a mid-tower chassis which Fractal Design has just unveiled. So this here is the Define S2 Vision RGB. Now the Define S2 was released in October of last year, and in this version, as the name suggests, it seeks to provide you with a view inside the case no matter which angle you approach it from. Now there will be a standard version of Vision available which is called Blackout, and then this one here which we're looking at today, which is decked out with all the RGB. There are some key similarities between the original S2 and Vision. The layout for the most part retains that spacious open layout. The differences really lie in a number of features, one of which is the inclusion of 4 Prisma AL14 PWM fans. Now in terms of the pricing for this case, you're looking at around about $224 in the UK and then $239 in the US. That is for the RGB version that we're looking at today. The blackout version is $179 and then $189. It's important to note that you don't just get the RGB fans with this RGB version, there are other key features as well. But either option isn't cheap, and for that price we do expect a lot of case for the asking price. Now if you do enjoy the content today, please consider to subscribe to the channel, hitting that subscribe button, and make sure the bell notification is turned on. And before we get into our review, today's video is brought to you by ASRock's Intel 300 series. Right guys, well we're going to start with the front of Vision RGB. So here we have a tempered glass panel which offers us a semi-transparent view of the front RGB fans. That glass sits on the front edge of a plastic fascia which has ventilation down each side since the front panel is completely closed off. Now to get access to the front, it is necessary to firstly pull out the filter which covers the entire bottom section of the case. Once we've removed that, we're able to pull off the front cover to reveal what lies beneath. And here we have 3 Prisma AL14 cooling fans. Each of those are 140mm, are PWM, and are addressable in terms of RGB. You can see that Fractal has hidden these fans behind a recess, which definitely looks more stylish. Now these fans each have 2 cables, one for PWM and the other for the RGB functionality. And as a result, there is a massive bunch of cables to sort out, but Fractal has allowed each of these to daisy chain so that you only have to connect one of the fans directly to the Adjust R1 controller. And with that controller we're able to switch between 8 colours, 5 brightness levels and 6 motion effects. And that controller is also compatible with other 5V strips and devices. Now the front panel connectivity sits up at the top and is arranged horizontally. So here we have headphone and microphone jacks, reset button, 1 USB 3.1 Gen 2 Type-C, 2 USB 2 ports, and 2 USB 3 ports. And so plenty to choose from there, and it's great to see that USB 3.1 is included. Up at the top of Vision RGB, we have an interesting design choice because in its pre-configured state, this case has a tempered glass panel without a cooling bracket. However, this can be swapped out for a cooling bracket assembly along with the filtered ventilation. And that bracket has support for 3 120 or 140mm fans, a 120, 140, 240, 280 or 360mm radiator, and even a dedicated fill port for custom water. And so the choice is yours as to which panel you go with. One thing I would advise is to leave that top section empty when you are installing your kit inside, as it will help when building the system because you can feed cables into those areas which would otherwise be obstructed. And Fractal has included a neat little button which offers a tool-free way to remove the panels at the top. All you gotta do is press it in. Okay, so for the side panels on this RGB version of Vision, both sides have been given the tempered glass panel treatment, and both panels give this nice wide view of the internal components. And since the side behind the Mobo tray is exposed, it might be a good idea to step up your cable management game. And as a bonus, Fractal has pre-installed an LED strip at the top of the chassis, which adds even more lighting over the system, and is a nice touch as this kind of thing isn't usually included. With those panels removed, we now have a view inside Vision RGB, and this case follows a conventional layout for a computer case. It accommodates up to eATX form factor, and around the case we have storage options that you might have seen before from Fractal. And of course, there are plenty of cutouts for cable management, and we're going to explore this now in more detail. Now the power supply sits at the bottom of the chassis, and there are rubber mounts underneath to cushion it. On the front side it is completely concealed behind this huge plastic shroud which extends right to the front. Now to install the power supply you will need to insert it from the back side as there isn't enough room elsewhere. And that PSU of course has the dust filter which we saw earlier, that is removed from the front of the case. Above the power supply we have a series of 7 horizontal and 2 vertical PCI covers. Each of those have the ventilation cutouts, however Fractal has opted to only give the horizontal plates the thumb screws. As you can see, we've utilised the vertical PCI arrangement for installing our card, and if you want to do the same you will need to purchase a riser cable. Unfortunately it isn't included inside the bundle. And above this, Fractal has included another Prisma AL14, again that is 140mm PWM and RGB. This one is positioned to be a rear exhaust. The S2 is all about open layout, and in the Vision RGB we get the same treatment with plenty of space towards the front of the chassis to install custom water cooling kit. Now the top of the PSU shroud lends itself to allowing 3 SSDs to be installed. However, with the GPU mounted vertically, you're only going to be able to install 2. We should also note that you'll need to borrow a bracket from the reverse of the case for each drive. It's a shame they haven't included more. The innermost section has tubing pass-through and can have accessories installed due to the mounting slots. You can also completely remove that panel to make way for a radiator. Now in terms of storage, there is support for different sized drives. Firstly, we have this trio of fully enclosed brackets which can house SSDs or 3.5-inch drives. Fractal has also included a SATA extension cable if you do occupy all of those cages. However, if you plan to have one of them empty, it can be used to store any redundant cables, which is pretty handy. And over on the back side of the Mobo tray, we also have 2 SSD plates, so there is no shortage of options for storage. While we're on the back side of the case, we should also point out that Fractal has kitted Vision RGB out with the Nexus 9P PWM fan hub, and this can handle up to 9 PWM fans and is powered by SATA from your PSU. Having that is really beneficial, especially since we have 4 included fans with this case. Not all boards have a good selection of those headers on them. Okay, so next we're going to get a closer look at the clearance options inside Vision RGB, as this is quite an important area for system builders who need to know whether something will fit or not. And so for the CPU cooler we have a maximum of up to 185mm for the height, though that would be almost touching the glass panel. Installed we have the Hyper 212 Evo, which is 160, and you can see there is no problems whatsoever. In the graphics card department, there is unrestricted space for up to 440mm, which will cover pretty much anything on the market. We installed the Gigabyte RTX 2070, which has plenty of room to play with. Now the location behind the motherboard tray is important for storing cables, and there is under 2cm here, which should be sufficient to keep most configurations nice and tidy. And there are plenty of cutouts and cavities to tuck away those unwanted cables, so you can keep on top of things. And lastly, we have numerous spots for installing different sized radiators. The front goes up to 360mm, the top goes up to 360mm, the rear can house a 140, and we can even install a 240mm at the bottom. So that is the lowdown on Fractal Design's new Define S2 Vision RGB. Essentially what we have is a fully tempered glass version of S2, decked out with the 4 RGB cooling fans, LED strip, RGB controller, and the Nexus 9P fan hub. So if you like S2, you prefer something that is able to, kind of showcase your config to its full potential, then this is going to be ideal. Now some of the things which I think are really good about this case, even though they're pretty small, pretty insignificant, things like the SATA extension cables, we've all been there when we've tried to feed the SATA cables at each of the drives and it won't quite reach. So having that to loop to each drive is really handy. Multiple top plates, something which we're seeing in many cases nowadays. The ability to switch between different panels is going to offer more flexibility. Having that top section empty is so handy when you come to install your rig inside the case. We also like the RGB controller, which is SATA powered. It's streamlined so you don't have to plug in all of those cables, and since it's magnetic it can attach wherever you want it inside the chassis. or you may even be able to feed it outside for better access. Having an LED strip pre-installed is also a really nice touch and is something which you don't usually get on a computer case. And we should mention, by the way, that once you do power the system down, the last colour selection is stored in memory for the next boot up. The only gripe that we really have with this case is the cost, which is going to be way out of the price range for most people. Now, even if you factor in the cost of those 4 cooling fans, which is around about 80, you're still left with around 150, which is still a lot of cash. So guys, that concludes our video today. If you're interested in seeing how this case here performs in terms of the cooling, head on over to the full review, which is going to be on the screen and in the description very soon. Thanks very much for taking time out of your day to watch today. Please hit that like button if you found it useful. If you didn't, double click that dislike button. Would appreciate it if you could subscribe to the channel, guys, and make sure that the bell notification is switched on. Take care, and I'll see you guys in the next one.